The text message came at 6:47 p.m., right as Rachel was passing the mashed potatoes. Get up and go. Don't say anything to your daughter. I stared at my phone screen, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, wondering if my old eyes were playing tricks on me. I'm Margaret Whitmore, though most folks in Asheville call me Maggie. At 82, I've seen enough surprises to know when something doesn't sit right. But this was different. The number wasn't one I recognized, and the message felt urgent in a way that made my chest tighten. "Mom, you're not eating," Rachel said, her voice carrying that tone she'd perfected over the years. Sweet on the surface, but with something harder underneath. "I made your favorite sweet potato casserole." I looked around her dining room, this space that had once been mine. The Blue Ridge Mountains visible through the windows, the familiar smell of cornbread mixing with something I couldn't quite name, tension, maybe, or secrets. "Rachel had insisted I come for dinner tonight. We need to talk about your finances, Mom," she'd said on the phone yesterday. "I'm worried about you managing everything on your own. At my age, people expect you to start forgetting things, losing track of important papers." Rachel had been particularly concerned about my confusion lately. The truth was, I hadn't been confused about anything. My mind was sharp as the day I retired from the Asheville library system 20 years ago. 40 years of organizing information, helping patrons research everything from family genealogies to business plans, had taught me to pay attention to details. And lately the details hadn't been adding up. 3 months ago, I'd mortgaged my house on Marymount Avenue to help Rachel's boutique business. "It's just temporary, Mom," she'd promised, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "This investment opportunity will change everything for our family." $75,000 I'd given her, money that represented my security, my late husband Robert's memory, our life together. Robert had been gone 8 years now, but I still felt his presence in our home. He'd been a respected attorney here in Asheville, known for his integrity and his careful way with money. "Maggie," he used to say, "always keep something in reserve. You never know when you'll need it." My phone buzzed again, another text from the same unknown number. "She's planning to have you declared incompetent. Check your safe tonight." The sweet potato casserole turned to dust in my mouth. My hands started trembling, and I set down my fork before Rachel could notice. Incompetent. The word hit me like a slap. I thought about the papers I'd signed last month, the ones Rachel had brought by the house with her lawyer boyfriend Derek. "Just updating your power of attorney, Mom. Standard stuff for someone your age." I'd read through them, of course, or thought I had, but Derek had been rushing me, explaining legal terms in that smooth voice of his, making me feel foolish for asking questions. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is really just a formality. Rachel wants to make sure she can help you if you ever need it." "Mom?" Rachel's voice seemed to come from far away. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Rachel was 54 now, successful by most measures. She drove a new BMW, lived in this beautiful house in the historic Montford district, sent her kids to private schools. But her boutique business had been struggling for 2 years. She'd mentioned it in passing, always followed by optimistic talk about turning things around and new opportunities. Was my own daughter planning to have me declared mentally incompetent? The thought seemed impossible. This was Rachel, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd helped through heartbreaks and homework struggles, the woman who called me every Sunday, who brought me soup when I had a cold last winter. But then I remembered other things. The way she'd grown impatient when I asked about the business loan last month, how she'd taken over paying some of my bills to help simplify things for you, Mom. The concerned looks she'd exchanged with Derek when they thought I wasn't watching. My phone buzzed a third time. "Leave now, go to your safe, trust no one else tonight." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Rachel looked startled, her fork clattering onto her plate. "Where are you going?" "Just the bathroom," I managed, grabbing my purse from the side table. My voice sounded normal, thank goodness. 40 years of helping library patrons had taught me to stay calm under pressure, even when my world felt like it was tilting sideways. I walked down the hallway, past family photos that showed happier times. Me and Robert at Rachel's wedding, the grandchildren as babies, Rachel graduating from UNC with her business degree, so proud and full of dreams. When had those dreams turned into something that threatened me? In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. Gray hair neatly styled, blue eyes still sharp behind my glasses, wearing the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked like what I was, a respectable widow, a former librarian, someone's grandmother. I didn't look like someone who needed to be declared incompetent. Instead of going straight home, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Sunny Point Cafe on Hendersonville Road. I needed time to think, to process what those messages might mean. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour, just a few college students with laptops and an elderly man reading the Asheville Citizen-Times. I ordered chamomile tea with shaking hands, then sat in a corner booth where I could see anyone coming or going. Paranoid, maybe, but Robert always said paranoia was just good sense, dressed up in uncomfortable clothes. My phone buzzed again. Check your safe. She's planning to have you declared incompetent. This time I texted back, "Who is this? How do you know this?" The response came quickly. "Someone who cares about justice. Your daughter has been busy while you've been trusting her. The papers you signed weren't just power of attorney updates." My heart started racing. I thought about that afternoon last month when Rachel and Derek had come to my house on Marymount Avenue. They'd spread documents across my kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had shared morning coffee for 30 years. Derek had been smooth, professional, explaining each paper in that lawyer voice that made everything sound both important and routine. I'd read them, or thought I had, but Derek had been explaining while I was trying to read, his voice overlapping with the words on the page. Rachel had been bustling around, making fresh coffee, chatting about her business plans. Between the two of them, I'd felt rushed, maybe even a little flustered. "Is all this really necessary?" I'd asked. "I mean, I'm managing fine on my own." "Of course you are, Mom," Rachel had said, squeezing my shoulder. "This is just in case. You know, if you ever got sick or had an accident, we want to make sure someone can help you without having to go through courts and all that legal mess." It had sounded reasonable at the time, responsible, even. But now I wondered what else had been buried in those documents. What had I actually agreed to? My phone buzzed. The living will amendment was forged. She added clauses about mental competency. Check page 3 of what you signed. Living will amendment? I didn't remember signing anything about a living will. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. I finished my tea and drove home through the winding streets of North Asheville, past the old Victorian houses and towering oaks that had watched over this neighborhood for over a century. My house on Marymount Avenue looked the same as always, a modest colonial with the front porch swing where Robert used to read his law journals. I'd lived here for 43 years, raised Rachel here, nursed Robert through his final illness here. It was more than my home. It was the container of my entire adult life. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The porch light was on, and I was certain I hadn't left it on when I'd gone to Rachel's for dinner. Maybe I was being paranoid again, or maybe someone had been here while I was gone. Inside, everything looked normal. The same family photos on the mantel, the same Afghan draped over Robert's favorite chair, the same stack of library books on my end table, but something felt off, like when you come home and can't shake the feeling that someone's been in your space. I went straight to Robert's old study, now my office, where I kept important papers. The safe was hidden behind a bookshelf filled with Robert's law journals and my collection of North Carolina history books. Robert had insisted on having a good safe installed when he'd started handling more sensitive cases. "Some secrets are worth protecting, Maggie," he'd said, "and some people can't be trusted with them." My hands shook as I entered the combination. Robert's birthday, then mine, then our wedding date. The safe opened with a soft click, and I began pulling out documents: birth certificates, marriage license, Robert's will, insurance policies, the deed to the house. But my original living will wasn't there. I went through every document twice, my panic growing. I knew exactly where I'd kept it, filed between Robert's death certificate and my Social Security papers. But the folder was empty except for a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. "She has what she needs now." My phone rang, making me jump. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, where did you go? I went to check on you in the bathroom and you were gone. Your car wasn't in the driveway." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I felt a bit unwell, honey. Came home to rest." You should have told me. I would have driven you home. Her voice sounded concerned, but there was something else underneath. Frustration, maybe. Or calculation. I'm fine, Rachel. Just tired. Well, we still need to finish our conversation about your finances. Maybe we can meet tomorrow? Derek thinks it would be good to review your accounts. Make sure everything's organized properly. Derek thinks. Everything came back to Derek these days. Derek with his smooth voice and expensive suits and way of making me feel foolish for asking questions. Derek who'd rushed me through signing documents I clearly hadn't understood. Let me check my calendar, I said, though I knew I wouldn't be meeting with Derek anytime soon, not until I understood what was really happening. After I hung up, I sat in Robert's old leather chair, surrounded by the remnants of my organized life, trying to piece together how I'd become the target of some kind of scheme. My own daughter, the child I'd sacrificed for, worried about, supported through every challenge and disappointment. My phone buzzed one more time. The original will is missing because she took it. Tomorrow, call Judge George Lancaster. He was your husband's friend. Trust him. Tell no one else about these messages. I barely slept that night, lying in the bed I'd shared with Robert for 30 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what was happening to my life. Every sound made me jump. The old house settling, the wind in the oak trees, a car passing on Marymount Avenue. By 6 a.m., I was up making coffee and planning my next move. Judge George Lancaster had been Robert's best friend since law school at UNC. They'd practiced in different areas, Robert in estate planning, George in family law, but they'd remained close through the decades. After Robert died, George had been one of the first people to call, offering help with anything I needed. Robert was like a brother to me, Maggie, he'd said. That makes you family. Before calling George, I spent the morning going through my files systematically. What I found made my blood run cold. Insurance policies I'd never seen before, with beneficiary changes I hadn't authorized. Investment account statements showing transactions I didn't remember making. A new deed of trust on my house that I certainly hadn't signed. Someone had been busy with my financial life, and it wasn't me. I called Judge Lancaster's home number at 10 a.m., hoping he'd remember me kindly enough to take my call. Maggie Whitmore, his voice warmed immediately. What a pleasant surprise. How are you holding up, dear? Of course. Would you like to come by the house? Margaret's making her famous apple butter today, and I know she'd love to see you. An hour later, I sat in George and Margaret Lancaster's sun-filled kitchen in the historic Grove Park neighborhood, surrounded by the comforting smell of cinnamon and apples. George had aged since Robert's funeral, his hair completely white now, but his eyes were still sharp with the intelligence that had made him a respected judge for 25 years. Now then, he said, settling into the chair across from me with a cup of coffee. What's troubling you? Maggie, I have to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned months ago. George exchanged a look with his wife. Rachel came to see me back in July, said she was concerned about your mental state, wanted advice about protecting your assets. My heart sank. What did she say, exactly? She claimed you were getting confused about money, forgetting to pay bills, making poor financial decisions. She asked about the process for getting someone declared incompetent to manage their own affairs. The room felt like it was spinning. And what did you tell her? I told her that from everything I'd seen, you were sharp as a tack and perfectly capable of managing your own life. George leaned forward. But Maggie, I also told her that if she was genuinely concerned, she should encourage you to update your estate planning documents and maybe consider giving someone power of attorney for emergencies. She's already got power of attorney, I said quietly. I signed the papers last month. George frowned. Who drew up those documents? Derek Morrison. He's Rachel's boyfriend, a lawyer. The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. George and Margaret exchanged another look, this one darker than the first. Maggie, George said carefully, it's generally not advisable to have family members or their romantic partners prepare your legal documents. There can be conflicts of interest. Margaret set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. George, show her the other thing. George went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Rachel also asked me for copies of some old documents from when Robert and I worked together years ago. Said she was trying to organize your financial records and wanted to make sure she had everything. He handed me a document I'd never seen before. It was a trust agreement, dated 15 years earlier, with Robert's signature and mine, but I had no memory of signing it. Robert set this up after his first heart attack, George explained. He was worried about what would happen to you if something happened to him, but he was also concerned about protecting your assets from potential future problems. I read through the trust document, my hands shaking. It was complex legal language, but the basic structure was clear. A significant portion of our assets had been placed in an irrevocable trust with me, as the primary beneficiary and specific protections against creditors and legal challenges. George, I don't understand. Why don't I remember this? You were recovering from your own surgery at the time. Remember when you had that gallbladder operation? Robert handled all the paperwork and said he'd explain it to you later, but then you recovered so well and he was doing better, and I think he just never got around to it. You know how Robert was about not worrying you with legal details. It was true. Robert had always handled our finances and legal matters, insisting it was too complex and boring for me to worry about. You've got better things to do with your time, Maggie, he'd say. Let me handle the paperwork. I stared at the document, trying to process what this meant. How much money are we talking about? George pulled out another paper, a recent statement from the trust account, as of last month, about $847,000. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. $800,000? That's impossible. Robert was very good with investments, and he was worried about inflation and healthcare costs. He wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone else for financial security. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, do you understand what this means? If Rachel is trying to have you declared incompetent to get control of your assets, this trust protects you. She can't touch it. But there was more. George pulled out one final document. Rachel doesn't know about this trust. When she asked for copies of Robert's old papers, I gave her everything except this. Something about her questions made me uncomfortable, so I kept this confidential. I looked at these people who'd been Robert's friends for decades, who were now offering to protect me from my own daughter's schemes. The shame was overwhelming, but so was the relief. What should I do? First, George said, you need your own attorney, someone who doesn't know Rachel and has no connection to her boyfriend, someone who can review all these documents you've signed and make sure your interests are protected. He wrote a name on a piece of paper, Sarah Mitchell. She's young but brilliant, and she specializes in elder law. She'll know exactly what to look for. I didn't go home after leaving the Lancasters. Instead, I drove to the Hampton Inn on Tunnel Road and paid cash for a room under my maiden name, Margaret Collins. If someone was monitoring my movements, and after finding those mysterious documents, I wasn't taking any chances, they could wonder where Maggie Whitmore had disappeared to. From the hotel room, I called Sarah Mitchell's office. Her secretary said she was in court but could see me at 4 p.m. if it was urgent. It was definitely urgent. While I waited, I spread all my documents across the hotel bed and really studied them for the first time. What I found made me sick to my stomach. The power of attorney I'd signed wasn't just for emergencies, it gave Rachel broad authority over my financial affairs immediately. The Living Will Amendment included language about diminished mental capacity that could be interpreted almost any way someone wanted. Most disturbing was a document I'd overlooked before, a property deed transfer that had been filed with Buncombe County just 3 days ago. According to this, I'd gifted my house to Rachel for $1. My signature was at the bottom, but I had no memory of signing it. That's when I understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about getting control of my money for my own good. Rachel was stealing everything I owned, piece by piece, document by document. My phone had been buzzing all afternoon with calls from Rachel. I'd let them go to voicemail, and the messages grew increasingly frantic. Mom, where are you? I'm worried sick. Mom, please call me back. Derek thinks we should call the police if we don't hear from you soon. Mom, I'm driving around looking for your car. This isn't like you. But it was like me, actually. Rachel just didn't know who I really was. At 4 p.m. sharp, I walked into Sarah Mitchell's law office on College Street. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. Her office was small but organized, with diplomas from Wake Forest Law School and certificates in elder law and estate planning. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, shaking my hand firmly. Judge Lancaster said you might need help with some family legal matters. I told her everything, from the mysterious text messages to the documents I'd found to the trust agreement I'd never known existed. Sarah took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you some personal questions to establish your mental state for the record? For the next 20 minutes, she put me through what felt like a mental competency test: current events, math problems, memory questions, logical reasoning. I answered everything correctly, some questions so easily I was almost insulted. She felt the need to ask them. "You're clearly competent to manage your own affairs," she said finally. "In fact, you're sharper than most people half your age. Now, let's look at these documents you signed." Sarah examined each paper carefully, making notes and occasionally shaking her head. "This power of attorney is far too broad," she said. "And these signatures," she held up the deed transfer and studied it under a magnifying glass. "Mrs. Whitmore, this signature doesn't match the others. Look here, the way you form your breath is completely different." "What can we do?" I asked. "Several things. First, we're going to file papers to revoke that power of attorney immediately. Second, we're challenging this deed transfer as fraudulent. Third, we're going to make sure that trust Judge Lancaster showed you is properly documented and protected." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have to ask, why didn't your daughter know about the trust?" I thought about Robert's way of handling our finances, his protective instincts, his belief that women shouldn't worry about money matters. My husband thought he was protecting me by handling everything himself. I think he planned to tell me about the trust when I was older and might need it, but he died before that conversation happened. And now that protection is protecting you from your own daughter. We spent the next hour strategizing. Sarah would prepare all the necessary legal documents to protect my assets and challenge the fraudulent papers. But she also had practical advice. "Don't go home tonight," she said. "If your daughter is desperate enough to forge documents, she might escalate when she realizes you're fighting back. Stay somewhere safe while we sort this out legally." I decided to stay another night at the Hampton Inn. From there I called my old friend Betty Jean Morrison, who'd worked with me at the library for 20 years. Betty Jean had retired the same year I did, and we'd stayed in touch, having lunch once a month and sharing gossip about our former colleagues. "Maggie, honey, where have you been?" Betty Jean's voice was full of concern. "Rachel called me this afternoon looking for you, said you'd disappeared and she was worried you might be having memory problems." Memory problems. Of course that would be Rachel's explanation. Poor Mom is getting confused and wandering off. "Betty Jean, I need you to know something. I'm not having memory problems. I'm having family problems. Rachel's been forging documents and trying to steal my assets." There was a long pause. "Oh honey, are you sure? That seems so unlike Rachel." It was exactly like Rachel, I was realizing. The same daughter who'd manipulated her way out of chores as a child, who'd convinced Robert to pay for her expensive college sorority fees by promising she'd study harder, who'd borrowed money from us over the years for various emergencies that never quite got repaid. "Betty Jean, I need to ask a favor. If anyone asks where I am, please don't tell them. I'm safe, but I need some time to handle this legally before Rachel realizes what I'm doing." "Of course, dear. But Maggie, are you really okay? This all sounds so overwhelming." For the first time in days, I smiled. "Actually, Betty Jean, I'm better than okay. For the first time since Robert died, I feel like myself again." That evening, I sat in my hotel room with a notepad and started making lists. Everything I knew about Rachel's financial situation, every document I'd signed in the past year, every conversation that had seemed odd at the time, but made sense now in the context of a systematic effort to steal my life. I also called my bank and put alerts on all my accounts. Any transactions over $500 would require my personal authorization with a password only I knew. Too little, too late for some things, but it would prevent any new surprises. My phone buzzed with another text from that mysterious number. "Good job getting legal help. Tomorrow she'll realize you're fighting back. Be ready." Sarah Mitchell called me at 7 a.m. the next morning with news that made my blood boil. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've had a forensic accountant review your financial records overnight. You need to sit down for this." I was already sitting in the hotel room's uncomfortable chair, but I gripped the phone tighter. What did you find? Your daughter has been systematically looting your accounts for the past 8 months. The $75,000 you gave her for her business? That was just the beginning. She's withdrawn another $47,000 using the power of attorney, always in amounts just under the reporting thresholds. My hands started shaking. How is that possible? I would have noticed missing money. She's been clever about it, moving money between accounts, taking from your savings and investment accounts rather than your checking account that you monitor regularly. And she's been covering the withdrawals by selling some of your stock holdings. I felt sick. Robert had built that portfolio over 30 years, carefully choosing stable companies and reinvesting dividends. It represented not just money, but his hopes for my security after he was gone. A second mortgage. On the house Robert and I had worked so hard to pay off, the house we'd celebrated when we made the final payment, burning the old mortgage papers in the fireplace and toasting our freedom from debt. How much has she stolen total? Close to $250,000, not counting the value of the house she tried to transfer to herself. $250,000. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of my daughter's betrayal. Mrs. Whitmore? Are you okay? We fight back. I'm filing emergency motions to freeze all transactions on your accounts and to void the second mortgage. I'm also filing a complaint for elder financial abuse and document fraud with the district attorney's office. Criminal charges. Against my own daughter. A year ago, the thought would have horrified me. Now it felt like justice. After I hung up with Sarah, I called the one person who might be able to help me understand Rachel's mindset, her ex-husband David Chen. Rachel and David had divorced 5 years ago, but they'd remained on decent terms for their children's sake. David was a CPA who worked for one of Asheville's larger firms, and he'd always struck me as honest and practical. Mrs. Whitmore. David sounded surprised to hear from me. How are you? Rachel mentioned you haven't been feeling well lately. David, I need to ask you something confidentially. How bad are Rachel's financial problems? There was a long pause. Mrs. Whitmore, I probably shouldn't discuss Rachel's finances with you. David, she's stolen over $200,000 from me using forged documents. I think our normal boundaries have been crossed. Another pause, longer this time. She's stolen from you? Are you sure? I told him about the forensic accountant's findings, the fraudulent power of attorney, the second mortgage on my house. David's silence grew heavier with each detail. Oh God, he said finally. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. Said something about what? Rachel's boutique has been failing for 2 years. She's been borrowing money from everyone. Her credit cards are maxed out. She owes money to suppliers. She's behind on rent for the store. Last month she asked me for a loan to keep the business afloat. Did you give it to her? No. I told her she needed to declare bankruptcy and start over, maybe find a job working for someone else until she could get back on her feet financially. She was furious with me. I thought about Rachel's BMW, her expensive clothes, the private schools for her children, all of it built on debt and desperation, and now funded by stealing from me. David, when you were married to her, did she ever take money that wasn't hers? The pause this time was so long I thought he might have hung up. She used to take cash from my wallet without asking, he said finally. Small amounts, $20 or $40. When I asked about it, she'd say she was borrowing it and would pay me back, but she never did. I started keeping my wallet in my car because I couldn't trust her not to take money from it. My daughter, a thief since her marriage, probably longer. Mrs. Whitmore, what can I do to help? This is partly my fault. I should have warned you when I saw how desperate she was getting. Actually, there is something. I need someone to look after my financial interests who Rachel can't manipulate. Would you be willing to help me review my accounts and make sure everything's protected? David agreed immediately. We arranged to meet that afternoon at Sarah Mitchell's office. But first, I had another stop to make. I drove to Rachel's boutique on Biltmore Avenue, a small shop called Southern Grace that sold overpriced clothes to tourists and well-off locals. I'd been proud of Rachel for starting her own business, impressed by her determination to be independent. Now I understood that her independence had been funded by stealing from her own mother. The store was nearly empty at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. just one customer browsing through a rack of expensive scarves. Rachel was behind the counter, looking harried as she talked on the phone with someone who was obviously asking for money she didn't have. "I understand you need payment, but I'm waiting for some funds to clear," she was saying. "Yes, I know it's been 2 weeks. Yes, I understand the terms of our agreement." She looked up and saw me watching her through the window. Her face went white, then red, then settled into an expression I'd never seen before, calculating and cold. She hung up the phone and came to unlock the door. "Mom, where have you been?" "I've been worried sick. I almost called the police to file a missing person report." "I've been taking care of some business, Rachel. Legal business." Something flickered behind her eyes. Fear maybe, or recognition that her game was up. "What kind of legal business?" Rachel glanced at the customer, who was pretending not to listen but obviously hanging on every word. "Mom, let's not do this here. You're not thinking clearly. Derek says sometimes stress can make people paranoid, especially at your age." "Derek says." Always Derek, with his smooth explanations and legal manipulations. "I'm thinking very clearly, Rachel. Clearly enough to hire a forensic accountant and discover that you've stolen nearly $250,000 from me." The customer decided she didn't need a scarf after all, and hurried out of the store. Rachel locked the door behind her and turned to face me, dropping the pretense of concern. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she said. "The business is struggling. The kids need things. I have obligations." "You have obligations to your children, not to steal from your mother to pay for them." 3 days later, after Sarah had filed all the legal paperwork and the forensic accountant had documented every fraudulent transaction, I was ready for the next phase of my plan. I called Rachel from my hotel room, using my sweetest grandmother voice. "Rachel, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation at your store. Maybe I was a bit harsh. Could we sit down and talk things through like family should?" I could hear the relief in her voice. "Of course, Mom. I've been hoping you'd come around. I know this has all been confusing for you. Why don't you and Derek come to dinner at my house tomorrow night? I'll cook that pot roast you used to love as a child. We can go through my finances together and figure out the best way forward." "That sounds wonderful, Mom. Derek will be so relieved. He's been worried that stress might be affecting your judgment." Derek had been worried. Of course he had. After I hung up, I called a private investigator Sarah had recommended, a former police detective named Marcus Webb, who specialized in domestic fraud cases. Marcus had helped me install tiny recording devices throughout my house, completely legal since it was my own home, and I was recording people who were conspiring to defraud me. Rachel and Derek arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, both dressed more formally than usual. Derek carried a briefcase, which told me he was prepared to conduct business tonight. Good. So was I. "Mom, the house looks lovely," Rachel said, kissing my cheek, "and something smells delicious." Derek shook my hand with his practiced lawyer grip. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I think there's been some miscommunication about your legal documents, and I'd like to clear that up." Miscommunication, that's what he was calling fraud now. We made small talk through dinner, how the pot roast came out, the weather, Derek's law practice. I played the part of the slightly confused elderly woman, asking simple questions and nodding along with their explanations about complex financial matters. Finally, as I served coffee and pound cake, Derek opened his briefcase. I set down the coffee pot carefully. "But I'm not having trouble managing my finances, Derek." "Well, that's just it," Rachel chimed in. "You think you're managing fine, but there have been some concerning signs. Like when you disappeared for 3 days last week without telling anyone where you were going." "Mom, you don't have any business matters," Rachel said gently, using the tone you'd use with a confused child. "That's part of the problem. You're imagining responsibilities that don't exist." Derek pulled out a folder of documents. "We've prepared some paperwork that would make this transition easier, a voluntary conservatorship arrangement, where Rachel would handle all your financial decisions, and a care agreement for a lovely facility we've found." "This is a lot to process," I said slowly. Derek and Rachel exchanged a look. "Mrs. Whitmore," Derek said carefully, "we've reviewed your accounts. Between the mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance costs, you're spending more each month than your Social Security and pension provide. you're slowly going into debt. I almost laughed. Derek, I don't have a mortgage. Robert and I paid off this house 15 years ago. Another exchange of looks, this one more significant. Mom, Rachel's voice was getting slightly impatient. You do have a mortgage, remember? You took out a second mortgage last month to help with my business investment. We talked about it. There it was. She was going to claim I'd authorized the fraudulent mortgage. I don't remember agreeing to a second mortgage on my home, Rachel. That's exactly what we're talking about, Derek said, leaning forward. These memory lapses are becoming more frequent. You signed the papers, we have your signature, but now you don't remember doing it. I pretended to look confused and worried. Are you saying I'm losing my memory? We're saying you need help, Mom, Rachel said. And Derek and I want to provide that help. We've already filed some preliminary paperwork with the court, just to protect you. Filed paperwork with the court. A competency hearing, probably. What kind of paperwork? Derek pulled out another document. A petition for conservatorship. It's not final yet, but it establishes our concern for your well-being and our willingness to take responsibility for your care. I read through the petition, which painted a picture of a confused, declining elderly woman who was unable to manage her own affairs. It cited the voluntary mortgage I'd supposedly taken out, my erratic behavior in disappearing for several days, and my increasing paranoia about family members trying to help me. When did you file this? I asked. 2 days ago, Rachel said. Mom, we didn't want to upset you, but we have a responsibility to protect you even if you don't understand what's happening. Protect me by stealing from me and having me declared incompetent. The beautiful thing about this arrangement, Derek continued, is that you won't have to worry about any financial decisions or legal matters. Rachel will handle all of that, and you can just focus on enjoying your golden years in a safe, supportive environment. I looked at these two people, my daughter and her lawyer boyfriend, sitting in my dining room under my late husband's portrait, calmly explaining how they were going to steal my life and make me thank them for it. Well, I said finally, this is certainly a lot to think about. The Buncombe County Courthouse looked imposing in the morning light as I climbed the steps with Sarah Mitchell at my side. It had been 2 weeks since that dinner with Rachel and Derek, 2 weeks during which I'd let them believe I was seriously considering their voluntary conservatorship arrangement. They had no idea that every word of that conversation had been recorded, or that I'd spent those 2 weeks working with Sarah to build an ironclad case against them. Remember, Sarah said as we approached the courtroom, they're going to paint you as confused and declining. Stay calm, speak clearly, and let the evidence do most of the talking. Inside, the courtroom was already busy with morning proceedings. I spotted Rachel immediately, sitting with Derek at the plaintiff's table. She was dressed conservatively in a navy blue suit, playing the role of the concerned daughter. Derek wore his most expensive suit and his most trustworthy expression. Good morning, Judge Hawkins said. We're here for the matter of Morrison versus Whitmore, a petition for conservatorship. Mr. Morrison, you may proceed. Derek stood up, every inch the confident attorney. Your Honor, we're here today out of love and concern for Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, who is 82 years old and showing increasing signs of cognitive decline and poor judgment. He painted a picture of a confused old woman who was making poor financial decisions, forgetting important agreements, and becoming paranoid about family members who were only trying to help. According to Derek, I was a danger to myself and needed the protection of a conservatorship managed by my devoted daughter. Mrs. Morrison will testify about her mother's recent erratic behavior, Derek continued, including disappearing from family dinners without explanation, making wild accusations about forged documents, and most concerning, her complete lack of memory regarding financial agreements she made just weeks ago. Rachel took the witness stand with tears in her eyes, playing the role of the grieving daughter perfectly. Your Honor, it breaks my heart to be here, she said, her voice catching. My mother has always been such a strong, independent woman, but since my father died 8 years ago, she's been declining steadily. She testified about my confusion regarding the second mortgage, claiming I'd asked her to help me access my home's equity, but then forgot we'd had the conversation. She talked about my paranoid delusions that someone was stealing from me, when in fact she was only trying to help organize my finances. Last week she disappeared for 3 days without telling anyone where she was going, Rachel said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. We were terrified something had happened to her. When she finally came home, she claimed she'd been handling business, but she couldn't explain what business that could possibly be. Derek presented financial records showing the money I'd voluntarily lent to Rachel's business, the second mortgage I'd requested, and the power of attorney I'd insisted on signing. To someone who didn't know the truth, it looked like the scattered financial decisions of a woman losing her grip on reality. Your Honor, Derek concluded, Mrs. Whitmore needs protection from her own declining judgment. My client is prepared to take full responsibility for her mother's care and financial well-being. Then it was Sarah's turn. Your Honor, we respectfully request that Mrs. Whitmore be allowed to testify on her own behalf before any decisions are made about her competency. I walked to the witness stand on steady legs, looked directly at Judge Hawkins and began to speak in the clear, strong voice I'd used to help library patrons for 40 years. Your Honor, my name is Margaret Ann Whitmore. I am 82 years old. I live at 847 Marymount Avenue in Asheville, and I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. What you've heard here today is not a story about a declining elderly woman, it's a story about financial fraud and elder abuse. I testified about discovering the forged documents, about the money taken from my accounts without my knowledge, about the fraudulent second mortgage. I spoke clearly and calmly, presenting facts in chronological order, never raising my voice or showing emotion. The woman sitting at that table is not a concerned daughter, I said, looking directly at Rachel. She is a thief who has stolen nearly $250,000 from me using forged documents and fraudulent powers of attorney. Sarah began presenting evidence, bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, signature analysis proving the forged documents, the recordings from my dinner with Rachel and Derek, played for the entire courtroom to hear. Derek's voice filled the courtroom. The beautiful thing about this arrangement is that you won't have to worry about any financial decisions or legal matters. Rachel will handle all of that. Rachel's voice followed, We've already filed some preliminary paperwork with the court, just to protect you. We were hoping you could sign the conservatorship agreement tonight. The color drained from Derek's face as he listened to his own voice describing their scheme. Rachel looked like she was going to be sick. But Sarah wasn't finished. She presented the trust documents Robert had established, proving I had substantial assets that Rachel knew nothing about. She called David Chen as a witness, who testified about Rachel's desperate financial situation and her history of taking money without permission. Finally, Sarah called Marcus Webb, the private investigator, who testified about his findings regarding the forged documents and the money trail showing systematic theft from my accounts. By the time Sarah finished, the conservatorship petition looked like what it really was, a criminal conspiracy to steal from an elderly woman by having her declared incompetent. Judge Hawkins didn't need to deliberate long. She looked at Rachel with obvious disgust. Miss Morrison, what you have done to your own mother is despicable. You will surrender any and all powers of attorney immediately, and you will make full restitution for every penny you have stolen. To Derek, she said, Mr. Morrison, your conduct in this matter brings shame to the legal profession. I am reporting you to the North Carolina State Bar for investigation of professional misconduct. As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, complete vindication, not just legal victory, but personal triumph over people who had tried to steal my dignity along with my money. 2 months after the court hearing, I sat in Sarah Mitchell's office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The criminal charges against Rachel and Derek were moving through the system slowly but surely. Derek had been suspended from practicing law pending the state bar investigation. Rachel's boutique had closed, unable to survive without the stolen money that had been keeping it afloat. But today wasn't about punishment. Today was about making sure my life's work would have meaning long after I was gone. Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah said, spreading documents across her conference table, I've prepared several options for restructuring your estate plan. Given everything that's happened, I assume you want to make some significant changes. I looked at the will I'd signed with Robert 20 years ago, back when our biggest worry was making sure Rachel would be financially secure after we were gone. How naive we'd been, thinking that providing for your child was the same thing as protecting them from their own worst impulses. I want to leave Rachel $1, I said, and I want the will to explain exactly why. Sarah nodded. She'd helped other families navigate the aftermath of financial abuse, and she understood the importance of making intentions clear. What about the rest of your estate? I thought about all the women who would find safety and hope in the home where I'd raised a daughter who grew up to steal from me. It felt like the right kind of redemption. The trust that Robert established. I want that to fund a new program at the library, something for seniors who need help navigating legal and financial matters. Maybe if other families have better resources, fewer elderly people will fall victim to the kind of scheme Rachel and Derek tried to pull. Sarah was taking notes, but she looked up at that. That's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Whitmore. What would you like to call it? The Robert Whitmore Center for Elder Rights. He always believed that knowledge was the best protection against being taken advantage of. We spent the next hour working through the details, $50,000 each to my neighbors, Harry and Dolores Peterson, who'd been like family to me for 30 years. They'd always been kind to Robert during his illness, and to me after his death, never expecting anything in return except friendship. $25,000 to Betty Jean Morrison, my old library colleague, who'd supported me without question during the darkest period with Rachel. Another $25,000 to Marcus Webb, the private investigator who'd helped me document Rachel's crimes. Good people deserve to be rewarded for their loyalty and integrity. The remainder of my assets, nearly $500,000 after all the specific bequests, would go to establish the Elder Rights Center at the library. It would provide free legal consultations, financial literacy classes, and resources to help seniors protect themselves from scams and family exploitation. And the letter to Rachel? Sarah asked. I handed her a handwritten note I'd been working on for weeks. Dear Rachel, I am leaving you $1, not out of spite, but as a reminder that your inheritance was never guaranteed. For 54 years I loved you, supported you, and believed in you. I mortgaged my home to help your business, trusting that you would use that help responsibly. Instead, you chose to steal from me, forge my signature, and conspire to have me declared incompetent so you could take everything I had worked for. The money you stole represented not just my financial security, but your father's life's work and our hopes for your future. You threw all of that away for short-term financial gain. I hope that someday you will understand that the greatest wealth I could have left you was a good example, and the greatest poverty you created for yourself was the loss of your integrity. The women who will be helped by my donations to the Women's Resource Center will receive the inheritance you chose to forfeit. I pray they use it more wisely than you would have. Sarah read the letter twice. Mrs. Whitmore, this is powerful. Are you sure you want to be this direct? I'm 82 years old, Sarah. If I can't speak the truth now, when can I? After we finished with the estate planning documents, I had one more stop to make. I drove to the Asheville library where I'd worked for 40 years, the place that had been my second home and my source of identity long after my children were grown. The head librarian, Jennifer Walsh, had been one of my trainees 20 years ago. Now she ran the system with the same dedication to public service that had driven my own career. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, welcoming me into her office. I heard about what happened with your daughter. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I explained my vision for the Robert Whitmore Center for Elder Rights and watched Jennifer's eyes light up as she understood the possibilities. This could help so many people, she said. Do you know how many seniors come in here looking for help with scam letters and confusing financial documents? We do our best, but we're not equipped to provide the kind of specialized assistance they need. That's exactly what I want to change. I want to create a place where people like me can get help before they become victims, not after. We talked for an hour about program possibilities, weekly seminars on recognizing financial scams, partnerships with local attorneys to provide free consultations, support groups for families dealing with elder abuse. The center would be housed in a renovated section of the library, with private offices for confidential consultations and classroom space for educational programs. Mrs. Whitmore, this is going to change lives. How soon do you want to get started? As soon as the legal paperwork is finished. I'm not getting any younger, and there are people out there who need this help now. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Asheville, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Rachel's betrayal: peace. Not the peace of someone who was giving up, but the peace of someone who had found a purpose larger than her own pain. The envelope arrived at Rachel's apartment on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with my return address written in my careful librarian's handwriting. Inside was a single dollar bill, and the letter I'd spent weeks crafting, along with photocopies of every forged document she'd used to steal from me. I know this because I was sitting in my car across the street when the mailman knocked on her door. Rachel had been living in a small apartment near downtown since her house went into foreclosure 2 months ago. The boutique was closed permanently, the BMW had been repossessed, and according to David Chen, she was working part-time at a department store while awaiting trial on the fraud charges. I watched her sign for the envelope, watched her face change as she recognized my handwriting, watched her hurry back inside to read what might be her mother's final words to her. 20 minutes later, she came storming out of her apartment building and marched across the street to my car. Her face was red with fury and streaked with tears. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, waving the letter in my face. "I'm your daughter. I made mistakes, but to humiliate me like this, to leave me with nothing." I rolled down my window halfway, enough to speak but not enough for her to reach in. "Rachel, you left yourself with nothing when you chose to steal from your own mother." I was desperate. The business was failing. I had bills the kids needed. The kids needed a mother with integrity, not stolen money. My voice was steady, calm. "You had choices, Rachel. You could have asked for help, honestly. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have gotten a job. Instead, you chose fraud. You're destroying my children's future," she sobbed. "They won't have anything from their grandmother, nothing from the family they came from." I thought about my grandchildren who I hadn't seen since the court hearing. Rachel had made sure of that, using them as weapons in her war against accountability. "Your children will have something much more valuable than money, Rachel. They'll have the knowledge that sometimes people face consequences for their actions. They'll learn that integrity matters more than inheritance." The Women's Resource Center had issued a press release thanking me for my donation and explaining how the money would be used to help other women escape financial abuse. The library had announced the creation of the Robert Whitmore Center for Elder Rights, with plans to launch programming within 6 months. "You've made me a laughingstock," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "Everyone in town knows what happened. My kids are ashamed of me. I can't even find a decent job because employers Google my name and find articles about the fraud charges." "Good," I said, and meant it. "Maybe other people considering similar schemes will think twice when they see what happened to you." The truth was, I'd hoped that the publicity would serve as a deterrent. Elder financial abuse was epidemic in communities across the country, often perpetrated by the victim's own family members. If Rachel's story prevented even one other elderly person from being victimized, then the embarrassment she was suffering had a purpose. "I'm still your daughter," Rachel said desperately. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "I never wanted you dead." "No, but you wanted me helpless. You wanted me declared incompetent so you could control my money while I was still alive to see you spend it. In some ways, that's worse than wanting me dead." I started my car, preparing to leave. Rachel grabbed the door handle, trying to keep me from driving away. "Mom, please. I know I made mistakes, but we're family. Can't we find a way to get past this? Can't you forgive me?" I looked into her eyes, searching for some sign of genuine remorse, some acknowledgement of the depth of her betrayal. But what I saw was the same self-centered desperation that had driven her to forge my signature in the first place. 6 months later, I stood in the bright, welcoming space of the Robert Whitmore Center for Elder Rights, watching as Jennifer Walsh cut the ribbon for our official opening. The renovated section of the Asheville Library hummed with activity, seniors attending a workshop on recognizing phone scams, a volunteer attorney meeting with an elderly man about suspicious contracts his son wanted him to sign, and a support group for families dealing with financial abuse gathering in our conference room. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jennifer said, joining me at the viewing window that looked out over the main floor, "your husband would be so proud of what you've created here." I touched the plaque by the entrance that bore Robert's name and his favorite quote, "Knowledge is the only protection against those who would take advantage of trust." He'd said that to me countless times during our marriage, usually when explaining why he insisted on reading every document before signing it, why he researched every investment, why he never made financial decisions based on emotion alone. If only I'd remembered his wisdom when Rachel and Derek came to me with their forged papers and smooth explanations. The center had exceeded our expectations from day one. Word had spread through the senior community about the free services available, and we were booked solid with appointments for legal consultations and financial planning sessions. More importantly, we'd already prevented 3 cases of elder fraud in our first month of operation, families who came to us with suspicious situations that our volunteer attorneys immediately recognized as scams. My phone buzzed with a text from that mysterious number that had started this entire journey. Watching the news coverage of the center opening. "You've done something beautiful, Mrs. Whitmore." I texted back as I had many times over the past months. "Who are you? Why won't you tell me?" The response came quickly. "Meet me at the Grove Park Inn at 2 p.m. Sunset Terrace. You deserve to know the truth." 2 hours later, I sat at a table overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, waiting for my mysterious benefactor to reveal themselves. The Grove Park Inn was where Robert and I had celebrated our anniversaries for 30 years, and being there without him still felt strange and melancholy. A young woman approached my table, maybe 35, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed somehow familiar. She was well-dressed but nervous, twisting her hands as she walked. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Detective Sarah Chen with the Asheville Police Department's Cybercrime Unit. I'm also David Chen's sister." David's sister. Rachel's former sister-in-law. The pieces started falling into place. "You're the one who's been sending me the text messages," I said. She nodded, sitting across from me. "I've been investigating a series of elder fraud cases in western North Carolina. When David mentioned Rachel's financial problems and her sudden interest in your legal documents, I started looking into her activities." "How did you know what she was planning?" "Derek Morrison was on our radar for similar schemes involving other elderly clients. We'd been monitoring his communications and discovered his text exchanges with Rachel about having you declared incompetent. When I realized you were David's former mother-in-law, I couldn't just sit back and watch it happen." Sarah pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Mrs. Whitmore, Rachel and Derek weren't just targeting you. They had a whole system set up. Derek would identify vulnerable elderly clients. Rachel would develop relationships with their families, and together they'd manipulate their way into control of the victim's assets. We've identified at least 7 other cases over the past 3 years. Your case was going to be their biggest score, but it was also the one that brought them down. When you fought back with lawyers and evidence, it gave us everything we needed to build cases against them for all their other victims." I thought about Rachel facing criminal charges, not just for what she'd done to me, but for a pattern of elder abuse that had destroyed other families. The scope of her criminality was breathtaking. "Why didn't you just arrest them before they could hurt me?" I asked. "We didn't have enough evidence yet, and we needed them to complete at least one crime to make the charges stick. But I couldn't let you walk into their trap blind, so I started sending you warnings." Sarah reached across the table and touched my hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, what you did, fighting back, documenting everything, building a legal case, you probably saved a dozen other elderly people from becoming their next victims." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the mountains change color in the afternoon light. This place that held so many memories of love and celebration now held the final piece of my strange journey from victim to victor. "What happens now?" I asked. "Derek is looking at serious federal charges. His law license is gone permanently, and he's facing 10 to 15 years in prison. Rachel," Sarah paused. "Rachel's cooperation with our investigation of their other victims might help her sentencing, but she's still looking at significant prison time. My daughter, the child I'd raised to value honesty and integrity, would be spending her middle age in a federal prison. The sadness of that reality would never completely leave me, but it no longer defined my days." As I drove home to my house on Merriman Avenue, my house, in my name, protected by legal documents I understood and had signed with full awareness, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life reclaimed. That evening, I sat in Robert's old chair with a cup of tea and the local newspaper, reading about the success of the Elder Rights Center and the federal indictments against Rachel and Derek. The woman in these articles was someone I recognized but had almost forgotten: Margaret Whitmore, retired librarian, community advocate, and fierce protector of vulnerable people. My phone rang with a call from David Chen. "Mrs. Whitmore, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. Sarah told me about her role in helping you, and I'm so grateful you had someone looking out for you." "David, there's something I want you to know. In my will, I've left college funds for your children, Rachel's children. They shouldn't suffer for their mother's choices. The silence on the other end told me how much that meant to him. Mrs. Whitmore, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Those children are innocent, and they're going to need all the help they can get rebuilding their lives after this. Education is the one thing no one can steal from them. After I hung up, I walked through my house, touching the furniture Robert and I had chosen together, looking at photos of happier times when I still believed my daughter was someone I could trust. The betrayal would always hurt, but it no longer had the power to diminish me.